This is a cassette tape for Alice in Chains' Dirt. I show this for two reasons. Firstly, because it's one of the last cassette tapes that are actually still in my collection. And oddly enough, both albums both boast the same property, and that's the fact that they're the only two albums that I own on multiple platforms. The other one is Metallica's Ride the Lightning, but today we're going to talk about Dirt. Alice in Chains' Dirt is widely considered to be their masterpiece. Definitely an album of dark, brooding elements that really combine together with really strange subject matter and very depressing subject matter to really create an ambiance of just excellence. You could really say that Alice in Chains had lyrics that could really predate today's emo bands, but there's a big difference between the two of them. Whereas today, the emo bands really talk about depression, suicide, and not being in love anymore with very upbeat music somewhat in the background, or at least chords that kind of boast more of a upbeat, maybe almost semi-romantic property. Alice in Chains' Dirt does it the way it's supposed to be done. It's dirty, it's murky, it's 100% downright depressing. This is an album to kill yourself to. Now, I own this on multiple formats. I would show you the CD, but I would have to dig through my 6 books in order to try to find it, not to mention track down the case and the 800 or so that I have back there, which is something that I should have thought of before I pressed play, but let's face it, I can only plan so much. I also show that this is in 2 different formats for another reason, and that's because both of them boast something very dissimilar. Here on Alice in Chains' Dirt, the cassette edition, you have yourself your basic tracks. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, you have 12. But in reality, there's 13, considering Iron Gland, which is a small little introduction between Hate to Feel and the end of Godsmack, is also on there. Now, the CD release actually has 14. There's Dream Sequence, which is a very, very interesting composition to say the least. It's more of an instrumental composition, whereas Iron Gland does have the lyric, I am Iron Gland. Dream Sequence kind of reminds me of what a merry-go-round would sound like if it was possessed by Satan. So it's a really cool track, and if you can find it, definitely check it out. It's another one of those hidden tracks, so it actually looks like that there's only 13 tracks including Iron Gland, which is pretty cool, but at the same time it's interesting to see that on different formats there's kind of different setups for the way in which this album progresses. As I said, this album is an extremely depressing number. The subject matter, of course, boasts drug addiction, suicide, not to mention there's also one track that doesn't involve either of the two. It actually involves Jerry Cantrell's grandfather, should I say, who was in World War I. That's, of course, the song Rooster. Now, this is a really interesting album also in the fact that it almost seems like night and day whenever you listen to it in a cassette format. Whereas side 1 really doesn't boast as many depressing feeling songs, though it does have 2, with Down in a Hole and Sick Man. There's really more of an upbeat light to the way that the music is portrayed in these particular albums. The tempos are a little bit more upbeat, and not to mention, the lyrics are a little bit less strained. It doesn't seem as though Lane is really putting as much real just doomy desire into it. And it's not so much that that's a bad thing, because these are absolutely excellent songs. The album starts off with Them Bones, which is one of their short little songs, kind of similar to We Die Young, which started off Facelift. Another great introduction song for another great Alice in Chains album. This is a quick little song which you can actually find on Guitar Hero. So if you'd never heard of Alice in Chains before and you love the game Guitar Hero, well, there's an introduction. Not to mention, I think Rock Band also had Man in the Box, or maybe I have the two confused, but either way, it's on the games, trust me. The second track is Damn That River. Actually, to be perfectly honest, this is an album that I find to have very few flaws. This is probably the one song that I really listen to the least. It's not so much that it's a bad song whatsoever. There's a very nice guitar solo laced within it, but at the same time, it's extremely upbeat. It's very different from everything on the album, and really, if anything, it's just setting you up for what's to come. Track number 3 is where things start to get really, really deep. Rain When I Die is probably one of the 2 songs that I would actually have played at a funeral of mine, probably more so often at the wake than at the actual gravesite. This is one of those songs that really just builds into that murkiness that you hear actually more on the latter Alice in Chains album, which a lot of people just call Tripod. However, the title itself is just eponymous, Alice in Chains. This is a long song. It's about 6 minutes long, but at the same time, the outro is something that boasts something that's very uncharacteristic for Alice in Chains. It employs a fade out and then fades back in to the crescendo finale, which is pretty incredible. It's one of those things where it's really building that atmosphere that you're being lowered down into the ground, and perhaps you're still alive in this particular format. You're in the box. You know what's going on, and now all of a sudden you feel the dirt being shoveled on top of you, and the fade in, so to speak, before the song ends is kind of the madness that you're feeling before you expire. It actually goes into a very apt song for that particular metaphor, Down in a Hole. This could be considered the ballad on the album, though it really definitely does not suit that format. This is also probably my favorite Alice in Chains song, and perhaps one of my favorite songs of all time. The unplugged version of this song is fantastic. However, the studio version is equally as well done, and the reason why is because while the unplugged version really strips down everything and makes Lane's feeling and emotion really emote out a whole heck of a lot better, considering it's supposed to be a very downtrodden song, the power of the chords and the electric guitar as opposed to the acoustic in the studio version really gives the song a renewed power and gives it a certain amount of grace. It really starts to build on what you're going to see on what I consider to be side B of the album. The next track you have is Sick Man. This is where things start to get a little bit more dark and dense. This is a song that's extremely difficult to really pull off if you're attempting to cover this, because Lane goes both very high and very low. This is something that he and Jerry are able to do very well in unison together and really plot their parts correctly to have it harmonize with beautiful synchronicity. And the one thing about this song that makes it really cool is the samples that they use during the middle part, the bridge part if you would, which is extremely haunting. There's definitely a clown that you can hear in the background which sounds like something straight out of a horror movie, and if it is, definitely leave me a comment and tell me which one it is. Then goes into Rooster. Rooster is, of course, the song that Jerry Cantrell penned about his grandfather, which was a World War I veteran, if I recall my facts correctly, which I believe I have. This is a very, very touching song. It's a very meaningful song. It's a very emotional song, and it really captures the essence of war from the standards of somebody who's actually going through it. This is a song that I actually dedicate to my uncle who passed away roughly 9 years ago to the day, who was a Vietnam War veteran. So he kind of has a parallel there, so I feel a little bit closer to this song than perhaps most on the album. It's also one that you hear on the radio all the time. A lot of people love this track. Side B, as I would call it, starts off with Junkhead, and this is where the album really starts to take a twist, and this is where it kind of parallels the Suicide Run a little bit, or the Suicide, references that you can kind of get from Down in a Hole or When I Die, and they really start to throw in the drug references 100%. Junkhead, of course, is going to be a reference to heroin, which is something that you're going to find a lot on Side B of this album. Of course, Lane Staley was an avid heroin user, and it was something that happened directly after he lost his girlfriend, which is one of the reasons why he really remained in tragic lament all the way up until his death in the early 2000s. In fact, his heroin addiction started to spiral out of control directly after these events took place. And, well, to be perfectly honest, as a man who's experienced loss in his life before, well, I can tell you that it can definitely screw with you a little bit, manipulate with your mind, and cause you to make some really poor decisions. But at the same time, this is a song that's extremely akin to the drug culture. It's really almost promoting it. He says lines in there such as, "I bet you be doing it like me and it ain't so bad. You know, what's my drug of choice? Well, what have you got? I don't go broke because I do it a lot." It's a really good song. It actually has a really trippy little guitar solo within the midst of it, which is something that I actually really like. It's something that I've extended with this particular tape. I dubbed it onto another tape and extended the guitar solo because I enjoyed it that much. We then go to the centerpiece of the album, which is Dirt. Dirt is, of course, the title track from this release, and it's one of those songs that really had to grow on me, and I really had to understand the meaning behind it. Whenever I first purchased this tape, this was a long time ago, and really Dirt just sort of seemed a little bit too dark for my tastes, even though I really like Down in a Hole and Rain When I Die, which almost seems like a complete and utter, retrograded statement that makes absolutely no sense. But this is actually a very simplistically written song that has very powerful lyrics, not to mention one of my absolute most favorite lines off of this album, "You are so special, you have the power to make me feel like dirt." You have the talent, should I say. You are so special, you have the talent to make me feel like dirt. I'm very sorry. This is another song that employs another guitar solo that really sets the mood, not to mention you can start to see the tuning of the guitar, not to mention the way that these songs are written kind of take a turn for the more depressing. This actually kind of has more of a Middle Eastern Egyptian sort of sound to it, which is really cool. We then go into Godsmack. Godsmack is, of course, the namesake of the band Godsmack, and to be honest, it's one of the weaker songs on the album. This is once again another song that's semi-about heroin addiction. As you can hear in one of the very last lines of the last verse, "Can't get higher, you will die, or you'll die. What in God's name have I done? Stick your arm for summer fun. So your sickness weighs a ton, and God's name gets smacked for fun." It's a very interesting song, probably one of the weaker on the album, in my particular opinion, but still, it fits for where exactly you're at. You then go into Iron Gland. Iron Gland's, of course, as I said, the little secret that they kind of have laced between Godsmack and the next song, Hate the Feel. This has a really, just absolutely drug-crushing sound to it. It really sounds like you're on a heroin trip, kind of like you're right there sitting with Lane Staley on the same trip, and then all of a sudden you come crashing down and you're descending into insanity. This is a really cool track. I really like it, and it's one of those things that really gets me pumped up for the next song, which is Hate the Feel. Hate the Feel is kind of got a nice little bluesy scale to it within it, and it's something that Alice in Chains has really been able to employ a lot throughout their career, which is really unique. And this is also a song that features some rapid-fire lyrics near the chorus, and also features another one of my favorite lines. Stare with me with open eyes and point your words at me. Mirror on the wall will show you what you're scared to see. Absolutely love that line. I love quoting it anymore. It's just one of those lines that really speaks to me. This is a song that really speaks to me, but the one that speaks to me the most right now, besides Down in a Hole, is definitely the next song, Angry Chair. I, of course, already mentioned Dream Sequence a little bit, so there's no need for me to get into that. But Angry Chair is a song that you sometimes will hear on the radio, and also had a video that was on MTV a good bit. This was a really, really cool song, and actually, whenever you first hear it, it sounds kind of interesting because it really sounds extremely dissonant, but at the same time, there's kind of two sides to this song. You have the crooning, the very droll side of it, which employs the verses. Then you have the little bit more enraged side, which is the bridge, and then you have, or even really the chorus, you could even call it, and then you have what I would consider to be more of the bridge, considering it only occurs twice in the song. The I don't mind, yeah, I don't mind. Lost my mind, yeah, I don't mind. Can't find it anywhere, I don't mind. That's where you kind of see a little bit more harmony between the Jerry and Lane, Jerry Cantrell and Lane Staley. And this is actually some of the best sounding harmonics that you're going to find between two vocalists. It's very, very difficult to top. Creates a really eerie atmosphere. Not to mention the introduction to this song also does the same thing. Picture this scene. Picture somebody whenever you're listening to the introduction of the song, walking down the stairs, lighting up a cigarette, and you're seeing them panned right to their face. And there's this face that they have right there of just absolute disdain, of absolute misanthropy. It's something that is a really cool vision in my head, and I'm really hoping that I'm able to represent it to you accurately. The last song on the album is Wood. Now, a lot of people don't know this, but Wood was actually a song dedicated to Andrew Wood, formerly of Mother Love Bone. I'll, of course, get to re-uploading my Mother Love Bone review. That way you guys can see exactly how I feel about their lone album. But this is also another song that's oftentimes played on the radio, most of the time the unplugged version. The unplugged version that you find isn't necessarily from Unplugged. I think it's actually from another show. They mix up, or they kind of shape up the chorus a little bit. They add a little bit of harmonic. Lane actually goes a little bit low where he typically goes high. It's a very cool song and the perfect outro for this album. It leaves you with the lines, if I would, could you? Almost like an invitation. If I were to go, would you be able to follow? If I were to take that final bow, would you bow next to me? It's a really, really interesting tribute to Andrew Wood, and not to mention a fantastic finale. Overall, Alice in Chains' Dirt is probably one of the most perfect albums that I've ever listened to. If I were to make a top 10 list, it would be extremely high on this list, if not at the top. Alice in Chains has always been one of my absolute favorite bands of all time. In fact, on Last FM, you'll notice that it's number 3, but in reality, with the number of times that I've spun this in my new car, it's probably number 2 or closer to number 1. Let's face it, I've been playing this album to death. I'm an absolute savage fanatic of Lane Staley's vocal work, should I say, and I love the fact that he and Jerry really employ some expert harmony, and they do it throughout the entire album. This is not something that only happens every once in a while. This is something they do very frequently. So there you go, guys. Alice in Chains' Dirt, probably one of the most perfect albums that you'll ever find, but also one of the most depressing. Hide the knives, hide the razors, don't be drinking any type of beer, and if you have a shotgun, make sure it's unloaded, because this album is set for death.